A person repeats mistakes because they seek a different ending to the same story. Promise yourself that this was the last time. Something inside silently laughs and drags you back into the same circle. You swear that you will no longer call that person, will not fall for those empty promises, will not waste another year on what obviously destroys you. Yet one moment of weakness and you are again where you started, ashamed and angry at yourself. Shame bites even stronger than the mistake itself. You think that you are spineless, that you lack discipline, that something is wrong with you. You hide this from others, but inside you repeat the same reproach. Why am I so stupid? Why do I never learn? The more you try to push this away, the deeper the trap. Because the psyche works differently than you expect. It does not erase what is painful, it circles around it, like a predator around prey. Every promise to yourself collapses at the first trigger. You may decide never again to lose your temper with your child, but one small provocation throws you into the same rage. You may decide never again to return to that relationship, but loneliness opens the same wound and you reach for the old number. It feels like someone else inside you takes control. The worst part is not even the mistake itself, but the hopelessness that comes afterward. You tell yourself that everyone learns from experience, but your experience seems to lead nowhere. You try to cover up the shame with new goals, with loud declarations, with books about motivation, but in the silence of the night, you know the truth. You cannot stop the repetition by force. You cannot silence the inner compulsion with willpower. That is why the loop feels unbreakable. You are not stupid and you are not cursed. You are simply caught in a law of the psyche that does not care about your conscious intentions. And until you dare to look this law in the eye, until you stop calling yourself weak and instead ask why the repetition has such power, you will always be pulled back. This is not a flaw of your character. This is the structure of your unconscious. And the moment you see it, the shame begins to loosen its grip. The mistake stops being a sign of your failure and starts pointing to a deeper truth that has always been there, waiting to be recognized. You have been told all your life that mistakes are teachers, that every failure is an opportunity to grow, that discipline and positive thinking will save you from repeating the same pain. These phrases sound reassuring, but when you try to live by them, they collapse like thin glass. If learning from mistakes really worked, you would not still be caught in the same loops. If discipline were the answer, you would have broken free long ago. If positive thinking healed, the same old wounds would not open so easily. The truth is that these slogans are built on the illusion that the conscious mind is in control, while in reality it only rules a small island, surrounded by a vast and stormy sea of unconscious forces. When you fail and repeat again, these illusions only make it worse. Instead of understanding the depth of what is happening, you blame yourself for not trying hard enough. You believe the problem is weakness of will, laziness, or lack of character. You punish yourself with more rigid rules, louder affirmations, stricter resolutions. And each time you fall again, the shame doubles. The illusion promises control, but it delivers only a deeper sense of powerlessness. There is also the comforting myth that time heals everything. You tell yourself that if enough months or years pass, the old patterns will fade. But time does not heal repetition, it reinforces it. The grooves in the psyche cut deeper with every cycle. Familiarity becomes safety, even when it is destroying you. That is why a person can leave a toxic relationship and after years return to someone with the same face, the same voice, the same wound. Time without awareness is just a rehearsal space for the same mistake to play itself again. Another illusion is the belief that awareness alone will free you. You read books, attend lectures, repeat mantras of wisdom, and still wonder why nothing changes. Knowledge is not transformation. To know that fire burns does not stop the hand from reaching out when the unconscious pulls. The mind can explain endlessly why something is harmful, but the shadow inside is not listening. And until that shadow is acknowledged, it will continue to rule from the dark. These illusions keep you trapped not because they are completely false, but because they are incomplete. They offer partial truths that make you feel responsible for the impossible task of defeating unconscious forces with conscious will. They seduce you with hope, but when they fail, they leave you alone with shame. And shame, once settled, becomes the strongest glue binding you to repetition. This is why the cycle does not break. Not because you are weak, not because you do not want it enough, but because the tools you were given were never designed to touch the real depth of the psyche. Freud called it the compulsion to repeat. He noticed that people return again and again to the same painful situations, even when those situations bring nothing but suffering. It is as if the psyche is trying to master something it could not bear the first time, staging the same scene over and over until it finds resolution. But instead of resolution, it usually leads to another wound. Jung expanded this by showing that what we do not accept in ourselves, the shadow, does not disappear. It waits in the dark, shaping our choices, attracting the same patterns, pulling us toward the same people who awaken our buried wounds. The shadow is not a metaphor. It is the hidden architect of repetition. Think about how many times you promised yourself that next time you would choose differently. Yet when the moment came, you were drawn as if by magnet to the same dynamic, the same kind of partner, the same kind of boss, the same kind of conflict. It feels almost scripted. The conscious mind believes it is choosing freely, but in truth, it is serving a script written long ago by trauma and unfinished emotions. The psyche prefers the familiar, even if it is toxic, to the unknown. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar freedom. This is why knowledge does not save you. You can fully understand that a certain choice is destructive and still take it. You can explain your childhood wounds, analyze your patterns, recognize the manipulation, and yet in the moment of trigger, your body and your unconscious seize control. That is why people feel torn. One part screams, "Never again," while another part walks straight into the trap. The repetition is not stupidity and not bad luck. It is the psyche's desperate attempt to integrate what was never integrated. When a trauma remains unresolved, the mind recreates situations that echo the original wound, not to torture you, but to force a confrontation with what you keep avoiding. That is why a person abused in childhood may unconsciously seek out abusive relationships as an adult. The repetition is the psyche's way of saying, "Look here, this is where it still hurts." But this explanation does not bring comfort at first, because once you see it, you realize how little control the conscious mind truly has. It is unsettling to admit that your most important choices may not have been free, that much of your life has been ruled by patterns you did not choose. This recognition is heavy, even frightening. Yet it is also the beginning of liberation. The truth is harsh. You cannot simply will yourself out of repetition. The unconscious must be brought to light. The shadow must be named. The wound must be faced. Until then, the cycle will continue, no matter how many times you promise yourself otherwise. Begin with observation, not with force. The first tool is the journal of repetition. Write down every situation where you notice the same pattern surfacing. The same argument, the same temptation, the same collapse of will. Do not judge. Do not try to fix it. Just track it. Patterns hate being exposed. The moment you see them written in front of you, they begin to lose their invisibility. The second tool is the practice of watching triggers. A mistake does not appear out of nowhere. It is always preceded by a spark, a phrase, a look, a silence, a memory. Most people only notice themselves once they are already in the middle of the storm. Training yourself to pause at the first spark is the difference between repeating and transforming. This pause is not passive. It is an act of power, a refusal to be dragged by the unconscious without awareness. The third tool is the technique of deliberate pause. When the impulse rises, to call, to shout, to surrender, you buy yourself a gap of a few breaths. In that gap, you invite the shadow to step into the light. You acknowledge, here is the wound speaking, not my whole self. You do not fight it, you do not suppress it, you simply name it. Naming is one of the oldest ways humans tame the unseen. What is unnamed controls you. What is named begins to soften its grip. The fourth tool is working with the image of the mistake. Instead of hiding from your shame, you give it a face. Imagine your repeated error as a character standing before you. What does it look like? What does it want? What does it fear? This may sound strange, but the unconscious speaks in images, not in logic. When you treat the mistake as a figure you can dialogue with, it becomes less of a curse and more of a messenger. Very often, it reveals a need that was ignored, a pain that was silenced, a child that was left alone. Transformation is not about erasing mistakes, but about changing your relationship to them. By journaling, watching triggers, pausing and dialoguing with the image, you begin to turn the unconscious into something visible. And once it is visible, it loses the power to dictate blindly. This does not mean you will never repeat again. It means each repetition becomes less automatic, more transparent, less shameful. And here the journey is not solitary. Share your experiences, speak your repetitions out loud. Join others who walk the same path. The moment you comment, confess, and witness the stories of others, the shadow loosens its isolation. Community creates mirrors in which you can see yourself more clearly. Alone, the unconscious is overwhelming. Together, it becomes bearable. This is why sharing your story is not weakness, but the beginning of strength. The deepest truth is that mistakes will never vanish completely. The psyche is not a machine that can be repaired once and then run without flaws. It is alive, messy, full of contradictions. To expect yourself to stop making mistakes forever is to demand perfection from something that was never built for perfection. This demand only fuels shame and despair. But when you stop expecting the impossible, you begin to see mistakes for what they really are. Teachers disguised as failures. Every repetition that once looked like a curse can become a map. The moment you stop fighting against the fact of error and instead ask what it is showing you, the repetition turns from punishment into guidance. That toxic relationship you fell into again is not proof of weakness. It is a mirror held up to the wound you still carry. That outburst of anger you promised to control but could not is not evidence of hopelessness. It is the voice of a part of you that has been ignored too long. The culmination comes when you accept that mistakes will accompany you for the rest of your life, not as enemies, but as companions that constantly point back to the shadow. They remind you where attention is still needed, where healing is not complete, where honesty has not yet entered. Instead of running, you learn to listen. Instead of hating yourself, you begin to integrate. And in this shift, the very energy that once destroyed you becomes the force that builds you. The emotional loop tightens here. Everything in you wants relief, finality, the end of repetition. But the psyche does not offer finality. It offers only deeper cycles, each one leading closer to integration if you dare to stay awake. That is why the real liberation is not in escaping mistakes, but in no longer being enslaved by them. And so you reach the open ending. You will still stumble, still repeat, still face shame. But now you know that every stumble is not a collapse. Every repetition is not proof of failure. Every shame can be turned into a door. The journey is not about erasing mistakes. It is about walking with them, seeing them, letting them shape you. And when you realize that, you understand that what felt like the end of the road is only the beginning. There is no final closure. The psyche is a labyrinth, and every corner you turn reveals another passage. You may believe you have solved the puzzle, only to find yourself once again facing the same familiar wall. This is not a sign of failure. It is the design of the inner world. Repetition is not broken in a single moment of clarity. It loosens slowly with each act of awareness, each time you dare to meet the shadow without turning away. The fantasy of absolute freedom from mistakes is seductive, but dangerous. It keeps you chasing a perfection that does not exist, measuring every misstep as proof that you are still broken. The truth is simpler and heavier. You will continue to fall, but now the fall itself can teach you. Each stumble can become less about shame and more about recognition. Less about collapse and more about seeing what still needs to be integrated. The culmination of this journey is not triumph, but humility. To accept that mistakes will always walk beside you is to end the war against yourself. The enemy you fought was never the mistake, but your own refusal to see its meaning. When that war ends, energy is freed. Energy that once fueled shame can now fuel growth. Energy that once kept you trapped in despair can now carry you into honesty. And so the loop that once suffocated you becomes the rhythm of your becoming. Each repetition no longer feels like a prison, but like a reminder. A reminder that the unconscious still has something to show. A reminder that the shadow is not a monster, but a part of you waiting to return. There is no final victory here, only an opening. The opening to live without fear of mistakes, without hatred of your own weakness, without the illusion of perfection. The opening to walk with the knowledge that errors are not chains but signs. Signs that point not backward into shame, but forward into transformation. And this is not an ending. This is only the beginning.